All right, I am very happy to introduce Dr. Leo Sprinkle. He is a pioneer in the field of abduction research. He has taught psychology. He's been in charge of clinical psychology at the University of Wyoming, and he's had a long career investigating UFOs and abduction experiences, including Travis Walton. So you'll notice one of the iconic pictures from 40 years ago is Dr. Sprinkle interviewing Travis a long time ago when this all happened. So he's going to tell us about that and other amazing and great things. Help me welcome Dr. Sprinkle.
Thank you, Alejandro. And thank you, ladies and gentlemen. When I met Travis, I was a busy professor at the University of Wyoming, trying to move from assistant to associate to full professor. And also I was trying to be director of counseling and testing at the university, which was an additional task. One young woman who was intern in the counseling center thought that I was a good guy because she didn't perceive me as pushing her around or making insinuating comments and so forth. At the end of her internship, she presented me with a little statue, face of a woman in stone, eyes closed, and half the face showing, as if the face was emerging from the stone prison into the new world. At the time, I didn't realize how significant that was, but I don't know how significant that was, but it alerts us to the theme of the presentation. When I met Travis, I was also trying to be a husband and father. My wife, Marilyn, and I have been married 63 years. We have 3 sons and a daughter. Marilyn is a beautiful woman, body, mind, and soul, and she did the heavy labor bringing our children into the lifetime, and she did the heavy lifting to raise them. But I helped. The task was in addition to what I was trying to do at the university. When I met Travis, I was also involved in UFO research. I'll offer to differ a little bit with Alejandro in regard to whether I was doing abduction research or not. The physical therapists tell us that if the fist is held here on the chest and then is moved out, the fist is abducted. It's taken away from the main body. But if the fist is out here and is brought into the main body, it is adducted. My clock says something is... Okay, I'll stop. It is adducted. I must confess my ignorance. After 60 years of working with people who have encounters with extraterrestrials, I don't know if they are abductees or whether they are adductees. It reminds me of a story of a high school student who might say, I was on the high school campus and these people took me away to a college campus. And there were students and there were instructors and professors and there's a whole lot of learning going on. Well, is that worse or is that better? it depends upon one's attitude about what is happening. And that's what I'll be doing. I'll be giving you my bias about what's happening, and you can see if it compares with your own view about what's happened to you or to your friends or to the people with whom you work. The task, what people call UFO research, is ongoing. And being a picky professor, I have sometimes have trouble with the words that people are using, like UFO. The United States Air Force decided to call these events UFOs, unidentified flying object. And yet we use a word to mean spacecraft. It may or may not be identified as extraterrestrial. It may be a spacecraft generated in the hangars of planet Earth for whatever reasons. The same way with the word doctor. Many people use the word doctor to refer to physician. I remember when I finished doctoral studies at the University of Missouri in '61, my wife's mother said to me, "You're not a real doctor. You can't help anybody." And I thought to myself, she's right. I can't help people's bodies very well, but I hope I can help their minds. And it's a great challenge, but I hope I can be helpful to people's souls. So, also in the word observer versus witness, I do crossword puzzles now that I'm retired. In the afternoon, I go home, take a nap, and do crossword puzzles. And sometimes the word witness is the clue. And I look at the word, and I know what they want. They want three-letter word, to see. He witnessed the UFO. But witness has more of a meaning than observation. It also means to testify. So if a person is an observer, but not talking about it, he or she is an observer. If he or she talks about it, he or she is a witness. And thank goodness Travis Walton was not only an observer and a participant, he is a witness. When I met him, it was an interesting time in UFO research. I'd just been in Nevada talking with a guy named Johnny Sands. And then Jim and Coral Lorenzen of Tucson, Arizona, the directors of APRO, the Aerial Phenomena Research Organization, called me and asked me if I would talk with Travis. Oh, thank you. Yeah, I apologize for being an old man and having an old man's throat and a raspy voice. Used to be a better speaker and even a singer when I was young. That's one of the ways I courted my wife, at a ukulele and songs. There were other guys, and so I knew I had to be special. When we got engaged and married, Marilyn told me that summer that we met, 1951, at the University of Colorado, that she had 2 dates every day that summer and 3 on the weekends. Sometimes I'd call her Thursday or Friday night, and I said, "Can we go out to together? And she said, sure. Let's have a study date on Saturday afternoon. Okay, I said, that sounds good. So we'd sit and study. I didn't realize that she had dates later on. So, I would have been scared more than I already was. She was a queen in a past life. I was a guard. I was loyal, so I earned the right to be with her this year, this lifetime. Yeehaw. Well, the UFO research, or the investigation of encounters, I'll call them encounters instead of abductions, if that's all right with everyone, was shifting in the 60s and the 70s. In the early phases, there was a group called NICAP, National Investigations Committee on Aerial Phenomena. When I finished doctoral studies in '61, I joined NICAP, and then I joined APRO, and I was so pleased with what was happening with APRO because Jim and Cora Lorenzen not only talked about the craft, the object, they talked about the occupants. They were called flying saucer occupants. And I learned a lot from them and also from their consultants. Dr. Jim Harder, PhD in engineering, Berkeley, and Dr. Frank Salisbury, PhD in plant science, Utah State. They were the early ones to not only focus on reports of encounters with craft, but also encounters with the occupants. I used to know, I could remember things like April 24th, 1964, Lonnie Zamora, highway patrolman out of Socorro, New Mexico, encountered a small craft and 2 small occupants. Now I have trouble remembering names of my colleagues that I've known for 50 years. Sorry about that. Well, in the 60s, the shift in the game was moving from the game played by 2 groups, the skeptics and the believers. The skeptics were intelligent, educated, they knew what the hell was going on. And the believers, we were silly, muddled people. We didn't know meteorology, we didn't know science. And then the shift occurred. In the middle of the 60s, for example, in 1966, there were 2 TV shows in New York City, and Jim and Coral asked me to participate. The one program was called Flying Saucers, Fact or Fiction. And there were luminaries like Dr. Menzel Howard from Harvard, astronomer, and Dr. J. Allen Hynek, astronomer from Northwestern. And I could just feel the disdain that Dr. Howard Menzel had toward me. Not only was I young, 36 years old, assistant professor, not a full professor, but also I wasn't a real scientist. What psychology got to do with science? And I could feel that energy directed toward me whenever he was willing to address my comments. Then the shift on the other TV program, Betty and Barney Hill were describing their 1961 encounter, and there were distinguished science writers, and Dr. Carl Sagan, PhD astronomer. One moment was kind of a charming moment. Dr. Carl Sagan was talking to Betty Hill, and he said, now, Mrs. Hill, you say that in your hypnosis session with Dr. Benjamin Simon, the MD psychiatrist, that you remember being on a table and the examiner was placing something in your navel? She said, yes. He smiled his beautiful smile, And he said, now we're all amateur psychologists here. And then he looked at me and said, oh, sorry about that. And I said, that's all right. My friends think I'm an amateur psychologist. He was about to tell Betty Hill what she actually experienced. So arrogant. During the break, there was another charming moment. One of the science writers came up to me. He could see I was being sympathetic to Betty and Barney and as they described their experiences and the effects. And during the break, this 6'5" or 6'6" science writer, he came up to me, looked down at me, he said, "You're a psychologist? You know that people see what they want to see?" And I said, "Yes, I think you're right." He smiled like, "Okay, now we're getting somewhere." But then I said, "But I also believe that people don't see what they don't wish to see." And he jerked back like I'd slapped him, and that was the end of the consultation. Some people have said that the UFO business is like a giant ink blot test in the sky. We project ourselves onto the ink blot. We project ourselves into the experience. And that's where, to me, the shift was occurring between the skeptics and believers. Now there were four players on the game. There were the silly believers, and then there were those who were knowers. There were those of us who've been on board a craft, had talked with ETs, who knew what was going on, at least as far as we were concerned. So there were the believers and knowers. And then on the skeptics, we found some of them were debunkers. They were being paid, either in prestige or money or whatever, to put down people and to say they didn't know what the hell they were talking about and what they were experiencing. So the game changed in my perception, and I enjoyed trying to see if it was okay, if people want to accept ETs as invaders. Dr. Jacobs, professor of history at Temple University, he wrote a book on the invaders. Bud Hopkins wrote a book on intruders. So were the ETs, are they invaders? Are they intruders? Dr. Jim Deerdorf, professor of atmospheric science, Oregon State, he changed into a student of the New Gospel, or the Gospels, New Testament, because of his interest not only in flying saucers and ETs, but in the spiritual implications. He saw ETs as instructors. And then there are those people who see the ETs as initiators. I don't know if you've ever seen the movie Wizard of Oz. Judy Garland plays the part of Dorothy, and she and her friends wanted to go see the wizard because the wizard's going to give us intelligence, going to give us heart and courage. They go through a series of encounters with difficult conditions, with spirits and blah, blah, blah. So by the time they get to the wizard, they have changed. And he's just a bumbling old professor who hands out their certificates. So one point of view, and I tend to be biased toward that point of view, is that we are going through an initiation. If it were merely invaders, all you have to do is fight. Yeehaw! But if it's initiation, we have to change. Pardon me for being a professor. The only time I ever got angry in public was a few years ago when a representative from a radio station in Chicago called me and asked me if I would be a participant. I said, sure. So I sat there in my chair at home, 8 o'clock, started listening to the guy who was giving a talk about his exploits, his abilities, his work. And then along about 10 or 10:30, he came on. Well, Dr. Sprinkle, we hear you talk with people who have ET encounters. I said, that's right. Well, we'll get back to you. So about midnight, I listened to him as he's talking about himself and his exploits. And he comes on the line and he said, Dr. Sprinkle, are these people crazy? I said, no, according to personality inventories, according to standardized interviews, these people are mostly normal. Okay, we'll get back to you. So I sit there and I listen to him. And he goes on and on about his work. And then about 5 or 5:30, he comes on the line and he said, well, Dr. Sprinkle, what do ETs want? I got angry. I said, you want me in 15 or 20 seconds to tell you what ETs want? Well, he said, people are busy. They're trying to get ready for work. So what do ETs want? I said, they want us to grow up. Grow up! He said, well, thank you very much, Dr. Sprinkle. He knew who I was talking to. But in some ways, my angry retort is accurate. In my opinion, ETs are our ancestors. We came from other places. So if we want to, we can think of them as our ancestors or our cosmic cousins or our future selves coming back. A lot of different theories. So the task is worse than merely fighting. The task is to change and grow up. When I met Travis, I was so pleased to find somebody who not only is intelligent and strong in a humble way, but also his friends and their experience. So it's something that goes beyond what happens when a person is not only an observer, but a witness, but the only observer and the only witness. So that added a lot to it. At that time, Travis was still experiencing the stress of the event and the aftermath. So we didn't do a regular hypnosis session. We did a little self-hypnosis for relaxation and stress relief. And then later, seeing him on other conferences, I think, wow, he truly is a witness and truly is a participant. And helping us to grow up. And what that does, in my view, is shift the game from not only whether these ETs are intruders or whether they're invaders or instructors or initiators, but also helps us see that we are participating in this shift for Earth and humanity. What I'd like to do is spend a little time talking about some of the people who are involved and who have written about their experience. And I hope that the comments are of interest to you, and I hope that they help you look at this theme, whether you resonate to the theme or whether you can merely tolerate the theme. And the theme is the end of the patriarchy. Now, one time in our history, the patriarchy was good. We men were protecting women and children. But now the extreme patriarchs are possessing women and children. My somewhat corny comment on the Middle East is that some of the patriarchs are saying, my loving God is more loving than your loving God, and if you don't believe it, I'll kill you. So the awakening of the female energy, didn't know it at the time, but that sculpture of the intern back in the 60s was a forerunner of the awakening of the female energy. If you haven't seen it, you might be interested in a book by Hannah Rosin, or Hannah Rosin, I'm not sure how she pronounced her name, R-O-S-I-N. The End of Men and the Rise of Women. I wish she had said the end of the patriarchy. I don't want the end of men, geez. Sometimes I profess to be one, and so let's say it's the end of the patriarchy and the rise of women. But anyway, I read the book, and it's fascinating because there are chapter after chapter after chapter. She reviews the studies which show that women all around the planet are the emerging leaders in the academic world, the business world, the medical and legal professions, and more and more in the political arena. In the U.S., the only two places that's not yet true is the U.S. Congress, although that's changing, and the CEOs of major corporations, although that's changing. I remember when GM had such a problem with addressing an ignition system in some of their vehicles, and some people supposedly suffered injury or death when the vehicle failed. And then the CEO out, and the new CEO came in, female, and the information was released that the ignition system in some vehicles was defective. One example among many of the shift in energy and the shift in the result of that energy. When I finished reading the book, The End of Men and the Rise of Women, I turned to Marilyn and I said, the reason I'm nice to you is because I want you to be nice to me when women take over. She said, it's already happened. She's so marvelous. More recent books have described this shift on the planet, humanity, but also described the ancient heritage or the history of humankind. When I was a kid, I went to the First Methodist Church in Rocky Ford, Colorado, and I thought I knew how humans came about. A male God created humans. Well, then I go to college and I read about evolution, and I read that we evolved from little critters. So it's a nice dilemma as to which hypothesis was more accurate. And some investigators, more recently, have described human history in different terms. Zachariah Sitchin, many books. Two that have been written recently that I enjoyed. The second edition of Krisanna Duran, the book Web of Life and Cosmos, Human and Bigfoot Ancestors, and also a book by Dr. Raymond Andrew Keller II, PhD in history at West Virginia University. His book is called Venus Rising, A Concise History of the Second Planet. Some people have said that the Arcturians, the Pleiadians, the Martians, the Venusians all came to Earth. There are some scholars who argue that there were at least 5 races: black, blue, brown, red, white, yellow. And there are different arguments about whether the races are supposed to coordinate and cooperate, or whether they're supposed to determine who's the big stuff. And in Europe, the white race saw themselves as superior, and same with the explorers who said they were going to go find the area to the east. So we were going to go through Columbus and his colleagues to India, and we found the Indians. So now people discuss, well, is the word better to say American Indian, or is the word better to say Native American? And I get confused as to which is more politically correct. Although I know many people who see themselves as coming out of that tradition. Chrisana Duran, she does. For me, I got interested in not only in ET encounters, I got interested in reincarnation, because many of the people I worked with expanded their view not only of the world and the space around the planet, but also their spiritual development. So back in the 60s, I met with Dr. Helen Wambach, a PhD psychologist, who was doing group studies, workshops on past lives. Dr. Stevenson at the University of Virginia was doing a lot of individual cases, and she started gathering a lot of data using a standardized interview for people who would go back to past lives. I remember sitting with her at the table of a restaurant. She was a big woman, biologically as well as psychologically and spiritually. And we would kid each other about health. She said, "Leo, the body's just a vehicle. You get rid of it, you drop it, and you go on." Well, when she came to our UFO conference in Laramie, the University of Wyoming, I can't remember when it was, I think it was 1983. We had the conference between 1980 and 2000. She said, "Leo, I'm having trouble dropping the body." She smoked and overate, and she'd kid me about being, a health nut, and we enjoyed that camaraderie. When she said she was having trouble getting into heaven, she'd had a heart operation, and then later several toes on her feet were removed. So she said those toes were in heaven, and she'll get there sooner or later. And what I did along with the formal studies, hypnosis, reincarnation, we also did personal exploration. During the noon hour, I'd sit there and I'd go back to being a Roman soldier or a Roman warrior, or a Tibetan monk. Various experiences which seem to fit the way I see myself as being both a spiritual warrior as well as a soldier. But then I was talking to my ego, and I said, well, now, wait a minute, is this nonsense? Is this stuff I'm making up? I wanted to be a real scientist, left brain, masculine, tough-minded, and, evidence. Got to have evidence. So I said to myself one day, sitting there in my room in self-hypnosis, I said, okay, I want proof. So I relaxed deeply, and I see sagebrush. Well, sagebrush in Wyoming is not all that rare. In fact, it's plentiful. And I thought to myself, nothing's happening, I might as well stop. And I said, no, that's psychological resistance. I know that. I've worked with people for many years. I remember talking with one young woman who is despondent, so depressed, and she was sitting there and talking to me, and she said, nobody listens to me. And I said, what? She said, nobody listens to me. I said, what? She said, nobody, you. Like, what do you count? But I was letting her know that there was somebody who was trying to listen to her. In the same way, my subconscious and my higher self was trying to get my attention by the sagebrush. So I said, okay, I'm with it. My hand holds the spear. My left hand holds the mane of the pony. I'm heading after a bison, a buffalo. We go up a hill. The bison rears back. And I just went blank in my mind or my memory or whatever. Nothing. I said, I must have died. No. I find myself in my mind and my consciousness standing up. And I hear yells. And off my left are my buddies. Paint, yelling, the kid got a buffalo! But then I turned, and my pony was dead. And I realized two things. One, I was so intent on my goal that I pushed my pony into a dangerous situation. And the second thing I realized, I had my proof. My emotions. Every time I tell that story, and I've been telling it for years, I weep. It brings up feelings not just from the mind and the body, but from the soul. That it's important for me to recognize that while I have a goal, that's good, and I should work toward it, but I also should be careful of my friends and family and those around me. And to me, that's what's happening on the planet. How can we be who we wish to be, individually, professionally, or occupationally, but at the same time, recognize that we need to work with others around us. Well, other people are contributing to this theme that there's a shift. Some people argue that we're going through a shift in consciousness. According to my spirit guides, at the end of this consciousness, not only will the planet and humanity rise in awareness, the galaxy, the whole cosmos is shifting. I don't know how to explain that, and I don't know if they are right. But then I think to myself, well, last June in Wyoming, there was a high school graduation in Laramie, there was one in Hannah, there was one in this town and that town. They weren't necessarily directly causing one another. It was part of a tradition. And there are high school graduates emerging, and they are no longer students now, they are alumni. So maybe it's possible for there to be a shift throughout the cosmos. And some people are saying we're going to move toward a time of peace and harmony. I hope so. Other people see it as Armageddon, destruction. The planet's going to be destroyed. I remember one time at one of our conferences, there was a young man who was pissed at my attitude. It reminded me of the time when I was in the Army down in Camp Chaffee, Arkansas, going through basic training, and one of the soldiers looked over at me and he said, "Hey, Springle, do you like the Army?" And I said, "No, not enough food, not enough sleep." Well, he said, "You don't seem to be bothered by it." I said, "Well, this is the easiest time in my life." He said, "Easy, easy." Oh, he was angry at me for claiming that I was going through an easy time. But I said, "You don't know my dad." We get up early and we go out, hoe weeds before he went to the office. And he could tell. I thought, how does he know? He was up ahead hoeing weeds in the dark. And then I realized he could hear that our hoes weren't working. So get weeding, cut those weeds. And the same way with this young man at our conference who looked at me when I was talking about the possibility that maybe we're in a shift and moving towards something better. He said, "Yeah, Leo, what if the planet is destroyed, and what if humanity is destroyed by the ETs? Yeah, what if?" I said, "Well, then we'll pick up our souls and we'll go to another planet and start all over again." That was disgusting to him. It's bad enough to be this far along on this planet, not to start a new planet. Well, some of the people who are helping us look at the change or the shift, Kiwani Lapsaritis, he was at our conference, and he's a fascinating guy. I heard from him recently. He's married a younger woman, and he has a son, and life is different for Kiwani. His first name comes from an initiation into a Native American tribe, or American Indian tribe, and he has written a couple of books about Sasquatch, Bigfoot. His thesis is that the Sasquatch are guardians of the planet, just like the ETs are guardians of the space around the planet. Ida Cannonberg, she wrote several books on her channeled messages from ETs and from celestials. Dr. Jim Deerdorf, I mentioned him, where he resigned as professor of atmospheric science to become a New Gospel or New Testament scholar. And he has several good books about the life of Jesus. Dr. Keller, he argues also that the Martians settled in Atlantis, the Venusians settled in Lemuria. When those civilizations went under, then the priesthood settled in Egypt. So in the southern high mountains, we had the Venusians loving. On the North Nile Valley had the priesthood of the Atlanteans, the Martians, fierce. According to some historians, a pharaoh decided that Jehovah is the one God. And Moses, same view. he said that he was told by the ET leader, "Thou shalt have no other God before me." So this view of history would suggest that we have both the Martian and the Venusian view. The fierce God, male, and the loving, compassionate goddess, Venus. And Keller argues Venus is rising. I don't know if any of you get up in the morning early, but the last few months, Venus has been so bright in the east. My wife and I, we get up at 5, I do my stretches, we go to the gym, come back at 7, and then I go to the office and do a little correspondence and telephone, and then come home and rest. After many years, I retired last year, and it's still difficult to shift from being active to less active. Well, Keller argues that Jesus came from Venus, as well as Nikola Tesla. I don't know if any of you are familiar with the name Tesla or Royal Rife. Royal Rife years ago developed a cancer cure, but it has been suppressed. If you use the equipment for medical purposes, you could be investigated by the FDA. Yeehaw. I got interested in cancer when I was a college student. My mother died of cancer, and so I started reading about the cancer-prone personality. Then I started reading about cancer cures. Got a list of a dozen books or so. One author claimed that seeds would be good for prevention of cancer. I looked over and I said, I don't know those seeds. Until I saw, oh, apple seeds. So I started eating an apple with my peanut butter sandwich every day, and would eat the seeds. And so far, we're supposed to knock on wood, no cancer here. Well, Tesla was using free energy 100 years ago, taking energy from space through what's called Tesla coil and transferring it into electricity. Finally, some brave people are developing the batteries for Tesla car, and the batteries have already had energy generated for the electricity. But we still rely on oil and coal and gas. We rape Mother Earth for her fossil fuels in order to create electricity. I wish I had the influence to help people in Wyoming recognize it's better not to use fossil fuels. There are some scientists, some disagreement. In the Laramie Boomerang, the last few months, people have been shooting missiles, or at least missives, back and forth about whether climate change or global warming is due to human use of fossil fuels. In my view, yep, it's so. I did write one letter to the editor, and I have a packet of information about Royal Rife and about Nikola Tesla. And I sent out, started a couple of years ago, sending to various editors and heads of groups, and I have had no response. In Denver, there's a Channel 9, and one of their advertising pictures is, Channel 9 listens, Channel 9 wants to know. tell us about an interesting story or a wrongdoing. So, so I wrote a snotty little letter. Does Channel 9 listen? Does Channel 9 want to know about wrongdoing? I said, here's information about Nikola Tesla and Royal Rife. Haven't heard from them yet. Maybe one of these days. Well, let's mention a couple of other books that are along the lines that interest me about the connection of ETs, humanity, and our fearless leaders. There have been many insiders who have talked about the possibility of governmental release, not only of the UFO files, but also the announcement that the extraterrestrials are here among us. Dr. Jones, C.B. Scott Jones, PhD in political science, but also a former Navy commander and combat pilot. He worked with Lawrence Rockefeller for many years, asking for the U.S. government to release information. He went to China, went to Russia. He said that these people said, okay, as soon as the U.S. releases information, we'll release information. It seems as if there have been attempts during the Jimmy Carter presidential administration and during the Clinton administration. According to insiders, there was a push for release of disclosure, but so far it hasn't happened. I hope the men and the women in this audience will forgive me for my comment. I think it's going to take a female president to release the information. Nancy Duturtre, she has a book, came out just now recently, How to Talk to an Alien. And Diane Tessman and Timothy Green Beckley have a book on UFOs. Ed Martin, King of Travelers. Ed Martin's a little guy from Texas. He came to our UFO conference, and he described his story. When he's growing up, he was a traditional Christian, and yet his mother knew a guy who had traveled in India and said that Jesus had traveled in India. So he puts on his backpack and he walks that 200 miles, talks to various priests, and looks at the various pictures and sculptures and so forth. And a fellow by the name of, maybe I'll think of it in a moment, has done a movie based upon Ed Martin's book, King of Travelers. And I think the movie is called Jesus in India. So the story goes that Jesus, as a child, had not only gone to India and also to Egypt, he'd gone to Northern Ireland, various places of spiritual development, and learned in Egypt how to control his own reaction to pain. And so, according to that view, Jesus survived the cross. Mary, his wife, who was pregnant with Sarah, went to France, and Jesus went to India and traveled and continued on until well past 100 years old. Whether one likes to look at these kind of topics and these kind of books or not, the implication from my viewpoint is that ETs present us maybe with invasion, maybe with intrusion, maybe with instruction, but in my bias, they certainly are presenting us with initiation. Can we change? Can we grow up? Can we become not only planetary persons, can we become cosmic citizens? To me, that is the question. And now, I thank you for your attention, and I'll let you see if you have questions. And thank you. Yeehaw, I got 30 seconds left. Can't think of any other story. Okay, well, are there questions?
Question over here.
Yes.
Dr. Keller, is that with a K or with a T?
Keller with a K, K-E-L-L-E-R, Keller. Yes.
May I have your attention, please? Anybody with questions, please step back here to this table. We have a microphone so everybody can hear the questions, and you can line up right across here if you like.
I know there are questions, but the question is, are there questioners?
Can you hear me? Yes. I have a question about your last comment with Jesus and his wife Mary. What book did you get that information from?
The work of Dr. Jim Deerdorf, and he has several books.
How do you spell his last name?
Deerdorf, D-E-A-R-D-O-R-F-F, Deerdorf. James, good scholar, and he has shown through a variety of comments from various writings and the New Testament that Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John may be the name of the Gospels, but there are different writers. And he shows his evidence to indicate one was a Greek, one was a Jew. Some of the disciples, were not literate. They did not read or write. There's a great comment. Oh, I got one more story. Yeehaw. There's a great comment that was shown to me by one of my clients. She's deceased now, but years ago, I worked with a woman who had been raised in the Roman Catholic tradition. And she was very bright and also a little uppity, according to men, because she's willing to talk with men about their attitudes. And she, in her scholarly investigations, came across St. Francis of Assisi, apparently the forerunner of the present Pope, who in my opinion is a Pope of the people, not of the church, and that's marvelous to see. But anyway, she had this quote from St. Francis of Assisi, and the quote goes, "Preach the gospel always. If necessary, use words." Love it, love it. Our actions speak louder than our words. Yes?
Yes, your talk was entitled When I Met Travis, and you started to talk about when you met him, and you interviewed him. Did you do extensive interviews or regression, or did you do therapy? Could you tell us a little more about your interaction with Travis?
Yeah, it's very brief because when I met him, he was still shook up from his encounter. And so we talked about how he felt, and we decided to be best not to do a formal hypnosis induction, so I did what we call self-hypnosis, relaxation of the body for stress release. And that was the main thing there in that hotel room. Later I had an opportunity to talk with him at conferences, but of course by that time he had written an excellent book and had the movie, and so he can speak for himself. So I was saying when I met Travis, I was learning, and Travis helped me learn a lot. Does that help you? Okay, thank you. Anyone else?
you ever heard of the Kedu Hokan?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear you.
Have you ever heard of the Kedu Hokan? They were, we say that they were a tribe, but they were actually a religion that other Indians joined from other tribes.
Say the name again, Cajun?
It's spelled Kaddohoken.
Oh.
The Kedu Hokan. They teach, I know this because my grandmother's father was the last Kedu Hokan priest, but they taught about a man named Petalahara, and he showed up in the Americas probably about, I'm thinking just from things I've heard, probably about 300 AD. And they existed and were quite large population until Spanish came and they all died of disease. Most of them, I'm still alive, but most of them died of disease at that time. But they tell the stories of the Petalahara, and he was white, and he walked with them, and he taught them, and that's how the Petalahara priests came about. So when you say that you believe that Christ went to India, I suspect he went just about everywhere.
That's a good comment. Some people have said that, that Jesus or others like him have been around various provinces, various countries to spread the message of love.
Hi.
Yes.
Dr. Sprinkle, I recalled you were doing hypnotic regressions with Stan Romanek. Stan Romanek.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, and I was concerned, you know, he got in trouble when apparently the police showed up at his door with a warrant and he found out somebody had downloaded child porn or something into his computer. Probably the NSA, because I always like to accuse them. Have you heard anything from him since then, and how is he doing?
Good question. Yes. Stan Romanek and his wife, Lisa, many people don't know that his sister also had encounters as a child. I've worked with her, and she is an interesting person. But Stan and Lisa have written 4 books, Stan 3, and then Lisa, his wife, the title of her book is charming, From the Other Side of the Bed, talking about her experiences as a wife and as a person, what Stan was going through. He described a variety of encounters and was on TV shows and so forth. At one point he was threatened by, who knows, government agents or whoever. And then later he was arrested for having child pornography on his TV monitor. He's told me, I haven't heard anything formally, but he's told me since then that those charges have been not only doubted but refuted. And so I'm hoping that he's going to be okay. I don't work with him now that I'm retired, but my feeling is that he's still willing to talk about his experiences and to back his books in regard to the interviews. But that's one thing a person risks. If you talk too much about your experience, that's where I've been lucky. I was pushed out of the University of Wyoming in '89, but I wasn't hurt or harmed. So, well, financially, but that's all. Yes, sir?
Yeah, I want to ask, when you went to your colleagues, after you spoke with Travis, how did they react?
Yeah, by that time, my colleagues were few and far between. Earlier, I had, when I was writing about reincarnation UFOs, the vice president called me into his office one day, and on paper as well as face-to-face, he told me no more UFO research, no more reincarnation research during office hours. Did I tell this story earlier? No, okay. One more story.
And are they still skeptical, or?
Well, I have my future story in mind. When disclosure of the ET presence and the extraterrestrial technology occurs, I'm going to walk over to the University of Wyoming. I'm going to talk to the spirits of my deceased colleagues. They're dead. And I'm going to say, I told you. And they'll say, we knew it all along, Leo, so I won't have the last laugh. But I'll be standing.
And last question, where can we find like recordings of you with Travis, like the regression and the interviews and stuff?
I'm sorry, I didn't understand the question.
Where can we find the recordings or like any like evidence of you like having a interview with Travis after his?
Oh, yeah, I don't think we recorded that. And we didn't do formal hypnosis. He did later with somebody else. Thank you. His veracity is confirmed by others. Thanks for thank you.
Hi, my name's Jonathan. You spoke about proof and evidence. I really try very hard to be a believer, and I do believe. But skeptics who approach me, and one of the questions they seem to have is, the next time you get abducted, take something. Take a glove, take an instrument, take some proof. Or back to Roswell, thousands of pieces of this craft strewn about. Nothing seems to show up. Nobody stuck a piece in their pocket, which I would do. And what do you say about that?
Yeah, I've talked to the people who took something and then it was taken from them when they left. Something on the spacecraft. And that's either a mystery if one has a skeptical point of view regarding what humans need for evidence. I use the word evidence rather than proof because proof is in the mind of the beholder. You could show somebody that loaves increased, fishes increased, and somebody else say, no, what happened was that Jesus shared, and so everybody else said, well, I've got a little fish in my pocket. Well, I've got a loaf in my robe. And so the miracle was not the building of new loaves and fishes. The miracle was that people were willing to share their loaves and fishes. So my comment, which may not be accepted to a left brain scientific-minded professor, is, ta-da, I don't know if that was timed, but my view is when people share their experience, that's when more evidence arrives. It's like saying you don't get paid until the day's work is done. And we want evidence.
Okay, we're actually out of time. That was our last question.
Thank you. Thank you.